G'day, Brodie Brown, Millionaire Mortgage Secrets. In today's video, I'm going to show you 3 ways to pay less tax and not be a loser. These are slightly advanced strategies. They're not too complicated. I'm going to explain them in a way where I think that you can pick up what I'm putting down. But in here, definitely some gold nuggets that you need to know, and also 1 or 2 little bonus tips, which if you are currently in that phase of looking at investment property and you're dealing with a property investment advisor or a property investment expert, you've got to know this, all right? Particularly if you're about to buy a new property, because for some reason they don't tell people that they're selling their new properties to about this. Okay, so I'm all up for paying a fair amount of tax for the nurses and doctors and policemen and hospitals and roads and infrastructure and all those things that we need, but would you really trust the Labor government that we have in power right now to use your hard-earned income in a smart way? Need I say more? All right, so also, and this is very, very important, I reckon this is the most important part for you to understand, is when I say loser, all right, losers focus on paying less tax. Okay, winners, I'm just making this up as I go along, winners focus on profit. Why? Because the whole premise of paying less tax is part of demonstrating a loss or a reduction in the amount of income that you've earned, as opposed to making a profit. Very simple maths. If, for example, you make 100 grand, this is exaggerated, you make 100 grand loss, let's say that your tax rate at the top there is 30%, 30 cents on the dollar. Guess what? You're going to get a refund of how much? 30 grand. All right, so that's, to get 30 grand back. What if you make 100 grand profit? What happens? And you're paying 30% tax. All right, that means you walk away with how much? Okay, so 100 grand loss or 100 grand profit, which would you rather make? Okay, a lot of people don't focus on that, and I don't know why. So whatever it is that you're doing, investing, planning, getting yourself set, you want to be thinking about making a profit, okay? But as you go, there are ways that you can reduce the amount of tax that you pay. So simple explainer on how most of you watching pay your tax. If you're an employee, you're paying tax as you go, all right? So many moons ago, we would pay our tax at the end of the financial year, where the tax office would, in conjunction with the tax office, you would reconcile how much you've earned during that year, and then you'd pay an amount of tax less any expenses during the year. But now we pay tax as we go, all right? So if, for example, you're earning 180 grand as a PAYG employee, pay as you go employee, you're paying roughly, it's about 48,000 and a bit, I'm just going to call it 50k. So you're paying about 50 grand of tax. So the goal is that, look, that's going to happen. Most of that's going to go to the government so they can waste it. You want to claw back as much of that as you possibly can. So the way this works, and when people talk about negative gearing or offsetting losses, etc., what that means is a reduction in the amount of income that you've earned in that financial year. So for example, if you have a loss on an investment property, very simple, easy to understand example of 20 grand, that's your loss. So have you earned $180,000 in that year? No, you haven't. You've earned how much? You've earned 160 grand. Therefore, what's happened? You've overpaid tax. Okay, because you've been taxed on as you go, PAYG. You pay tax as you went of probably an extra $6,000. So what happens? There's very rough maths, right? So you're looking at a refund of 6 grand. So you get 6 grand back. That's your tax refund. So when people talk about paying less tax, that's what they're talking about specifically. So claiming an expense or expenses or losses against their income during the tax year, thus reducing the amount of tax that they're going to pay. All right, so that's your explainer. So now let's jump into, it works slightly differently for self-employed people like myself, but it's not altogether different. We just do it at the end of the tax year. We have slight advantages in the fact that we pay tax a little bit later, but we still have to pay it. Okay, so it's not all strawberries and rainbows. So first things first is, and you should know this, is always use an offset account. Why? Why do you want to use an offset account? I reckon offset accounts for something which is so simple are generally misunderstood. Let's talk about what it is. An offset account this is the easiest way I reckon for you to understand what an offset account is. It's a savings account that's tax-free with the same interest rate as your home loan, maybe slightly less than that now. Does that make sense? Let me explain it to you. You've got your home, and that's got a loan of 800 grand, and that's at 6%. So you're paying interest on that 800 grand at 6%. But let's imagine that over here, always draw a little petition down here. An offset account is a separate account for all intents and purposes. When this loan's discharged, that offset account remains. It's just a savings account. Okay, so that's over here, and that's got a couple $100 grand in it. Trust banks to make it difficult to understand. Offset means offsetting the loan balance. So you have $200,000 in your offset account. That is offsetting or reducing the loan amount or the principal balance that you're being charged interest on. People are like, okay, well, okay, I kind of understand it, so I'm going to pay a bit less interest. Yeah, you are. So in this example, 6% on 100 grand is 6 grand, so it's $200,000. So that's saving you 12 grand in interest, roughly speaking. There's a whole range of other little advantages and benefits to offset accounts, but I don't need to cover them off in this video. So I'm just explaining to you how this works. So you've saved 12 grand of interest. Do you have to pay tax on this? No, you don't, because you haven't earned it, right? You don't have to pay tax on interest that you save. You have to pay tax on interest that you earned. Really important concept for you to understand. So you've got 12 grand of tax-free savings. For example, if you want to reverse that, if you're on the sort of top tax rate, you'd need to have that 200 grand invested at 10% thereabouts in order to receive that 6% net of tax return. Think about that. So that's how the offset account works. Why is that important? Well, other than it being a very effective way for you to save interest and repay more principal, I actually look forward to making repayments on my home loan every month, which is kind of weird. And the reason is because I have a shitload of money in my offset account and I'm basically just repaying principal. And that's one of those things that you're working towards, all right? So the reason why you might want to use an offset account to pay less tax and not be a loser is because if, for example, particularly if you're young, I deal with a lot of these people, they're in their 30s and 40s, and they don't quite know what the future holds. None of us do we? We make plans and God laughs, you know what they say. So let's say, for example, that you're buying this house and irrespective of the value, and you're thinking, you know what, this is a good little house or villa or unit in the right part of town, and I reckon that over time it's going to increase in value, and we're at the right sort of age, and our income is also going to increase. All right, so you've got that trajectory upwards, and you think, look, if we can, we would like to retain this property as an investment property. What happens when you buy a new home right? This is the new owner-occupied property. What happens, right? You're going to have a loan that you've used to buy this property, which is going to be, X, for example, right? Do you want to repay the balance of that loan? Well, kind of, yeah, maybe sort of theoretically you do, but the reason why in this case you don't is because you want to maintain the highest balance that you possibly can, because what happens to the interest on that loan when it's converted from an owner-occupied property into an investment property? Right, do you know, you following me? So the interest on an investment property is claimable as an expense against your income, right? It reduces the amount of tax that you might pay. Okay, I'm going to use might and perhaps and maybe, because I can't give you any hard and fast concrete information, because that's just covering my ass. All right, so the purpose here is if you have an offset account, again, you got an offset account over here, right, and you built that up, and then over the course of however many years, you got 300 grand in cash, 300 grand in cash. Have you repaid the loan? No, you haven't. Have you reduced the balance? Well, no, you haven't. Okay, you would have, because you're paying off less interest, but that's not the point. So you're going to use that 300 grand, and what are you going to do with it? That 300 grand is going to go into here as the deposit and to cover the stamp duty and costs of buying that new property. Remember, you always want to minimize the amount of debt that you have on your home, because it doesn't produce income, and the interest, there's no tax benefits at all to the debt on your home. All right, it's just providing you with a roof over your head. Okay, so the purpose of this being is that when you've got an offset account over here, you're not actually reducing the balance of the loan, the balance. Okay, I'm not talking about the limit, the balance. If that 300 grand is in this property, guess what? All right, the balance has been significantly reduced. That means that you're going to have a far smaller balance, a far smaller loan, a far smaller amount of interest that you're able to claim as part of your expenses in that investment property when it's converted. Okay, so really simple starter point. You've got to understand that, right? So to summarize that first point, if there is any questions or any doubt or any thoughts about keeping your existing property as an investment property in the future, because you might be buying a new property, all right, if you're not in that transition phase, or you're not in your final property, make sure that you're offsetting your loan as opposed to repaying it, all right? So that's point number one. Point number two is to, you don't want to say, it's speak to your accountant. Speak to your Okay, I love accountants. Mine's downstairs. He's a legend. I love him. He's a bit grumpy sometimes, and he will often get grumpy at me for doing things that he may have told me not to do. But that's the love affair that we have, and I recommend that you also have a love affair like that, because they're highly rewarding, and you learn a lot. So your job as an investor or a wannabe investor is to understand tax as much as you possibly can. Okay. So before you buy a property, right? Before you sell a property, you've got to make sure that you are fully engaged with your accountant. Really, really important. Okay. Now they're going to explain things to you which you don't know, and then explain things to you that you haven't thought of. They're going to explain things to you that the property spruiker that you might be dealing with definitely isn't going to tell you. Definitely is going to tell you, all right? So there's two parts to this, okay? So, well, there's actually many parts. These are the bonus bits, all right? So when you're speaking with your accountant, you also want to make sure you are getting a quantity surveyor to provide you with a depreciation schedule on your investment property, okay? So don't just, even if you're buying an older property, there's rules, and it's a complex series of rules to navigate, actually, based on years, and there's far more than I can explain in this video involved in this. That's why you shortcut, pay the money to your accountant and get them to explain this to you. Right, so even if you're buying an existing property and the rules say, oh, you can't claim depreciation on existing fixtures and fittings, or plant which is old, etc. All the building's old and you can't claim the capital depreciation on the building. Pay the quantity surveyor a small amount of money. They're not expensive to give you a depreciation report. Right? Generally speaking, they're going to find something that you can claim. All right. Now, the other thing that, and I'm actually relaying this to you because it's an accountant told me this years ago, and I was like, wow. Really important for you to understand is that here's what happens, right? So let's come back to that example of the conversion of an owner-occupied property or a principal place of residence into an investment property. A few things happen. Here's the example, right? So Tina and Mark, they bought a property back in, just made up Tina and Mark, sounds like a lovely couple. They bought a property back in 1997, all right, here in Perth, and they paid 300 grand for it. And they lived in it till 2024. Then they moved out. They bought a new home. So during this period of time, the property grew from 300 grand. Okay, now it's worth. They guess it's worth about 1.1 mil. That's what I think it's worth in 2024. They move out, they buy this new principal place of residence, PPR, okay? Here's the bit that you need to understand, right? You need to understand this before you go through this process. Let's think about what's going to happen in the future. This property hasn't grown as much as it's going to grow, particularly if you're going to hold it for the next 15, 20 years. So let's imagine that they flog this off in 2040, and at that time it's worth, say, I don't know, we'll call it 2 million, give or take. This part of the growth here between when they bought it in 1907 to 2024, where it grew from 300 grand to 1.1 million bucks, that's $800,000. 800 grand of gain. Because they were living in it, there's no capital gains tax. There's no capital gains tax to pay, right? Because it was their principal place of residence at that time. However, what's happened between 2024 and 2040 seems like a long way into the future, but it's actually not. It's only 15 years, right? The property has grown in value from 1.1 million to $2 million. So you've got a 900 grand gain. Haven't you? $900,000 gain. You're going to have to pay tax on that 900 grand, one way or another. The reason is because during that period, it's an investment. Get this, by doing one very, very, very simple thing, you can potentially save yourself a big chunk of tax. And here it is. Get a couple of real estate agents before you move out, before you convert this to an investment property, before you rent it, okay? Before it becomes income generating, before it becomes a legitimate investment. Get them to come over and give you the loftiest, fluffiest valuation, the most optimistic valuation you can possibly get, particularly in a market that we're in right now. So what I mean by this is we're trying to reduce this gain, because the lower this gain, the smaller this gain, the less tax we're going to pay. Let's say, for example, that you get a real estate agent over there and they're shit hot and they know what they're doing, and they're like, look, Mark, Tina, this thing's actually worth 1.3 every day of the week. This is worth 1.3. So, okay, 1.3 million, cool, fantastic. You get a copy of that valuation report. You might get two, and they're the same. Adds to credibility. So what have you done here? So you've increased the value of the property at the time where it converts from being a principal place of residence into an investment. And then what happens over here? So 200 grand gain over here means, sorry, 200 grand increase in value over here means a reduction in the gain between what it was when you converted it to what it is when you sell it. So that's $200,000 less. Doesn't sound like a big deal. Let's just imagine that you're paying 30 cents on the dollar in tax. Okay, this is rough, all right? So I'm just doing this for the sake of maths, but we're not too far off. So you've got 200 grand, right, times 30%, work it out, 60 grand. 60 grand, you've got a 50% capital gains tax discount because you've held the property for more than 12 months. So you've saved yourself 30 grand in tax. 30 grand, okay? So, 30 grand, like, is that really blowing your hair back? It's not a massive number, but the thing is that combined with all the other things that you're doing, they add up. They really add up. And the other thing is that you don't want to get to, and I see this happen all the time, you don't want to get to the point of sale at some point in the future and go, oh, fucking what an idiot. Happens all the time. People are like, I didn't do that. I forgot to do that. I forgot to use an offset. I repaid the loan instead. Can't I claim the interest on that? Why do I have to pay so much tax? Well, you have to pay so much tax because you're paying 30 grand extra tax or whatever it is because you didn't want to pay $300 to your accountant to your accountant for an hour of their time. All right, so don't do that. So invest money in the best professional services that you can afford. All right? Generally speaking, you pay for what you get. So how good's that? So number 3. I have to remind myself what this is. So this is the one thing that a property spruik is never going to tell you. When you're sitting down, I love these guys, all right? So you think about all the Muppets on YouTube and Instagram and Facebook all selling their shit. They talk about phantom cash flow or being cash flow positive but negatively geared. What they're talking about for new property is the ability for you to claim the depreciation on the building and the depreciation on the fixtures and fittings, so dishwashers, window winders, fans, carpets, blinds, everything. So everything that's in the building that's not part of the building is potentially taxed or potentially depreciable. Okay, so depreciation, what is depreciation? It's a non-cash deductible expense. It's the decline in the usable value of an asset. Okay, so the buildings depreciate, the land appreciates. That's why you want to make sure that when you're investing, the piece of dirt's got to be as high quality as possible. That's why I'm not a massive fan of apartments, particularly not in Perth, Sydney, parts of Melbourne, different sort of story, Brisbane as well, right? So where was I going with that? During the course of ownership, let's just say that you bought this place for 800 grand. Okay, I'm not sure how much you're getting for your money these days for 800 grand. I guess you can get something half decent, but you forecast way into the future, and actually now it's worth, say, 1.5 mil, and you've made You've made a 700 grand gain. Okay, party time. So you're going to pay tax on that 700 grand, and you think that's all it is, and you think that's all you're up for, but actually it's not. Okay, so I'll leave out the capital gains tax or the 50% discount to make it simple for you to understand. Did you know that all the depreciation that you claim in all the years as you go, claiming depreciation, and your accountant loves it, and you love it because you're paying less tax? Did you know that they're going to get you eventually? They're going to get you eventually. So what happens? Let's just imagine that depreciation. So let's just imagine that over these years, however many years, you've claimed shit, I don't know, you may have claimed 150 grand in depreciation. Easy to do. So if you've claimed 150 grand in depreciation and you paid $800,000 for the property, did you pay 800 grand for it, or did you pay 800 grand less what you've depreciated it by? Right, and what you've claimed a tax deduction and pay less tax because of it. So yeah, the answer is you didn't pay 800, all right? You actually paid 650. Okay, you paid 650 because you've claimed 150 grand because of the decline in value of the house, and they do decline. So what does that mean? Well, all of a sudden your profit's gone, your profit, your gain, what you have to pay tax on, has gone from 700 to plus 150, all right? So that's gone to 850. And you're like, ugh, why didn't anybody tell me this? Property spruikers aren't gonna tell you anything that might cost them a sale, but you need to know this. Should this prevent you from investing? No, it shouldn't. Investing is a good thing, a very, 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 very good thing, and everyone needs to do more of it. The problem arises because people jump into this without doing the research, without having the conversations with their accountant, without speaking to guys like me who, you know, are here to serve our clients, have a duty of responsibility and care to our clients to tell them about this shit. You need to know this. This is your responsibility. So, 150 grand, you know, so what, I'm making 150 grand more. Yeah, you're going to pay tax on that 150 grand. So again, same thing. So you work it out. So that $150,000, confusing myself over here. So that extra 150 grand times 30%, it's going to be more than that actually, because depending on what party life you're selling and you know where the tax scales are or tax brackets are at that time and the percentage of tax that you're paying and blah blah blah, you're probably up for paying a bit more. So this is actually going to be more powerful than what I'm explaining it to be right now. So 150 grand times 30% is what? 45 grand. So you're paying 45,000 bucks tax on that extra 150 times that, you know, 50% capital gains tax discount. So 22.5. Okay, if my maths is not wrong. So you've done your maths and you're planning a holiday. You bought that's enough for a nice new Rolex. And you're like, yeah, awesome, I'm gonna buy myself a Roro to celebrate on your 65th birthday or whatever it is, but actually that's gone to the tax man and you didn't know it was gonna go to the tax man because you didn't think about it. It's really, really important that you understand these kinds of things, right? These are the nuances. These are the nuances, all right? So where the nerds get ahead. So look, we covered lots of ground. As you can tell, I'm a bit of a nerd myself when it comes to this sort of thing. If you like this video, hey, subscribe, click like, leave a comment. But more importantly, if learning about investing and nerding out with me is something that you want to do, you earn more than 200 grand a year, your credit record is in excellent standing, you've got a big chunk of usable equity, you want to work with me and my team potentially, book a call with me using the link below. It's 10-15 minutes, it's free. Just to get to know each other, and I can learn a bit more about you and tell you if there's something that could happen between us. Just use the link below, and thank you very much for watching.